Welcome back. You're watching Gravitas. He's been accused of meddling in U.S. election and installing a stooge, as some call him, in the White House. He's been accused of stifling domestic opposition to cement his position as president for life. Vladimir Putin is also being called the uncrowned king of West Asia now. He used his one-day whirlwind tour of 3 countries in the region to showcase himself as a global statesman. Take a look.
In his 3 terms so far as president of Russia, Vladimir Putin has projected himself as a symbol of power. Putin has ruled Russia with an iron fist. He has crushed political opposition and remains Russia's most powerful and popular leader. It is no secret that Putin has global ambitions. He has gradually stepped up his role in global politics. Even as the United States probes Russia's alleged meddling in its elections, he is now expanding his country's sphere of influence. Putin has the first mover advantage in West Asia. It began with Russia's military campaign in Syria against the Islamic State. This was the first major military move by the Russians in the region since the Cold War. Many say that the United States let the ball slip in this case, because in the last 2 years, Russia has become a more appealing partner to leaders in West Asia. Putin's whirlwind tour of West Asia amid the chaos unleashed by US President Donald Trump's Israel declaration shows his increased influence in the region. In a day, Putin touched down in Syria, Egypt and Turkey and met their leaders. Diplomatic engagements were followed up with major announcements, led by the Russian president himself. Leaders from West Asia have paid more visits to the Russian president than the former US President Barack Obama. Another reflection of America's reduced role in the region is the Syria deal. Russia, Iran and Turkey have announced that they will broker peace in the country, while US President Donald Trump too has tried to warm up to West Asia. His efforts have failed to give him any edge in the region. Bureau Report, WION.
Joining us this evening, Gemma Fox, regional reporter with the Daily Star, and Stephen Golub, international affairs expert. Good evening to both of you. Gemma, to you first. How is Vladimir Putin's visit to the region being seen? Okay, I'm told we are trying to reconnect with her. Stephen Golub, Vladimir Putin is being called the king of West Asia. He had the first mover's advantage in Syria. He's calling the shots there. He's talking to the Egyptians. He's in touch with the Iranians. He has edged Donald Trump out, would you say?
Well, yes, I guess I would say that, although it's all relative, isn't it? Compare Putin at least knowing what he's doing in the region with Donald Trump flailing about making policies by virtue of tweets, purely in the case of the recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, for purely domestic U.S. purposes. I think, it's a volatile region with lots of complexity, but certainly there's more certainty on the part of Putin and what he's doing than what the U.S. or the world or the region is seeing in terms of Trump and a real vacuum in leadership coming from Trump.
And so do you see Putin playing a role in the Jerusalem situation as well? How far do you see him going? And where does this leave the American influence in the region? Some pockets of Iraq, maybe, not more than that?
Oh, I think inevitably the U.S. will have more influence than that. It's got a military presence in the region. It's very tied to the Saudis, and there's some interesting things going on with Saudi Arabia and potential reforms there, as well as the disastrous war and horrible war it's helping to wage in Yemen. So it's not as though the U.S. is disappearing from the scene. It's more a matter of overall strategy that Russia at least knows what it's doing. And partly in response to that, you see the leaders of Turkey and Egypt responding somewhat positively to this Russian presence, as opposed to the U.S. absence of leadership and absence of strategy in the region. To get back to your question, I think there are so many other important actors that could influence what goes on with Israel and Palestine, that Russia may play something of a role, but it's not a key role by any means.
Leave Syria, because as far as Russia is concerned, the war is over, they're packing up and they're going to have some sort of a presence there. But others in the region are still mulling the future of Syria.
Yes, and it's just because Putin declares mission accomplished, to borrow a very ill-begotten phrase that our President George Bush used in 2003 regarding Iraq, doesn't mean that everything will be settled down in Syria. It is a more settled situation, and ISIS is much weaker than it was just a couple of years ago. But a lot remains to be seen in Syria. One thing to also take real note of regarding Putin's announcement of the troop reduction in Syria is that he's made this kind of announcement before. That's number one. And number two, a lot of this could be for domestic Russian political purposes. He has an election coming up in March. It's an unpopular war in Russia. So to make himself appear strong and acting in accordance with the Russian public's preferences regarding Syria serves him in terms of domestic politics. He's going to win the March presidential election anyway, but this may bolster his standing somewhat regarding that unpopular war.
Indeed. Stephen Golub, good to have you on the show as always. Thanks very much for joining us. There's another player in the region.